Yeah, welcome to this NCD webinar. My name is Bert Albrecht and I work along with NCD International as a support person. We especially welcome all participants that joined today live and also those who will watch the recording later on. Today's presenter is Adam Johnstone. He is one of the directors of NCD International, also leads NCD Australia. And he, of course, since he leads NCD Australia, he is also located in Australia. I assume it will be around the area of Brisbane on the right side of the map. And Australia is very famous for the Gold Coast. Also, I haven't been there yet. This would be one of my dream locations to visit. But also the outback is, I see, something somehow attractive, but also dangerous, not just because of the kangaroos that will pass the road, and a fast driving car on the outback roads may easily be tempted to hit kangaroos. And so I will want to introduce the topic of today's session, which you already read when you have received the invitation, is NCD quality characteristics, matters of life and death. So we want to give Adam the opportunity, but before we start or hand the microphone over, I want to start with a short prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the session today. I want to ask you to bless us with the presentation. I want to ask you also to speak to us and explore, give us opportunities to apply what we hear and learn from Adam today. In Jesus' name. Amen. So over to Adam.
Amen. Thank you, Bert. I always enjoy Bert's creative introductions, and it always reminds me of things. So for many people that come to visit us or travel to Australia, of course, the number of things that can kill you in this country is really quite profound. And it was only 2 days ago, my parents lived downstairs in our house here. It was only 2 days ago that we had a 6-foot eastern brown snake in our front yard, which is about the second or third most deadly snake in the world. So most of it's true. And we get kangaroos literally in our front yard of our property. So our house is, while it's in the suburbs in a sense, it is quite a little representative picture of what you can die from in my country. Thank you all for joining today, and as Bert says, big greeting to those who are watching this perhaps at a preferred hour of the day via the video. Really glad that you could come join today. And as Bert mentioned, we have the topic of NCD quality characteristics, matters of life and death. May sound like quite a dramatic title, or even a title intended to wrongly grab people's attention to get them to come and listen to me. But by the time we come to the end, I hope you come to understand the topic as something that is perhaps not in any way overstated at all. So I wanted to just begin with just a brief update, I guess, from the view to some extent from NCD International, but also just a personal picture of why my hope is increasing post-COVID as it relates to NCD. And just 3 quick points I'd like to share with you by way of update. And one is NCD Church survey uptake has been increasing at 14% per month for 15 months now, given COVID hit, and when the people you serve, which is largely the Christian church, when churches are kind of shut down to some extent globally, that has quite an impact on the ministry you're attempting to do around the world. But this has been incredibly encouraging for us for 15 months now, with this wonderful number of churches engaging, coming back, and increasing numbers engaging, and seemingly perhaps having been shaken to some extent by a pandemic, really starting to look at, well, let's address church health even more seriously, because we are much more familiar in recent years with the significant impact of health right around the world. So that's very, very positive to see emerging there. Another point particularly encouraging for me is we've begun collecting NCD good news stories from around the world. My wife is actually heading up this initiative now. We have not tended to be very good at all at capturing good news stories in the NCD world. And to some extent, the reason has been that NCD began as a little bit of a counter position against the story-driven methods of growing the church, whereby people would come forward with particular stories and people say, oh, let's try to repeat or model ourselves based upon what those churches over there are doing. And so Christian Schwartz endeavored to find out, well, let's find out what the underlying principles are that go beyond all of those stories. But of course, if you have good news stories of churches implementing universal principles of growth, then it's very helpful to share those things. And so we just started looking into the database, and even with the very challenging post-COVID period, rapidly, even just for this year, we found about 20 or so extremely good progress stories of churches around the world. So we're busily starting to interview some of those churches in different countries and write up their stories so that we can share with many other people for encouragement, just generally in terms of good things happening in the church, but also specifically in terms of churches making significant progress with their health. So we look forward to sharing more of those very soon. And just a third point out of any number of ones I could have chosen, the inspiration process and the 4-week NCD Inspiration Coach training are underway to help churches go deeper with inspiring worship service. So a few webinars ago, I presented on the topic of inspiration and the discipleship tools we've developed to help churches make progress in inspiring worship service. And so I'm just very pleased that that process is well underway now, and has completed some training with some pastors in South Africa just a few weeks ago. And this has been really positive, particularly as churches around the world begin to engage more and more with the question of, well, what does inspiring worship look like in a changing world, and what do we need to change, and in many cases, what do we not have to change, but instead, how can we more broadly understand inspiration dynamics within not only our congregations and worship services, but inspiration is a theme in all of life. So that's been very encouraging, and plenty more things underway and under development over time that you'll get to hear about as we go. So that's some points that are particularly encouraging for me at the moment. So NCD quality characteristics, matters of life and death. Very dramatic. Let me begin by just exploring, as I present some things as we lead towards some discussion a little bit later on. Let's start somewhere that is perhaps, for anyone who's been around NCD, much more unremarkable points related to NCD. So the applicability of NCD, after many years, approaching 30 years from the initial work that Christian Schwartz and his father did many years ago, we reach a point now where we can say very emphatically that NCD principles apply essentially everywhere. We can say that they apply across the widest spectrum of cultures, many, many different cultures, the widest picture of them right around the world. We can see acceptance of the principles of NCD, and people are able to clearly see that no matter what context they find themselves in, these principles matter if you want to experience long-term healthy growth of your people and your churches. The widest spectrum of denominations, from Orthodox through Catholic and every different shade of Protestantism we have in the database. And it's absolutely remarkable that sadly, with the history of the church, where there's been plenty of conflict and even wars and goodness knows what, between different parts within the Christian church, that we can be part of a process that allows people from the widest range within the church to sit down and even have dialogue with each other on the basis of these common principles that each different group can see thoroughly applies to them. So, that's an incredible experience I get to have, Bert and many others get to have on a regular basis. But the everywhere applicability of NCD also extends further even to different religious starting points, whereby there's no prerequisite to the entry into the NCD process. And only some weeks ago, I was having discussion with my son-in-law, who'd been using the inspiration test in dialogue with his atheist friend, who was able to start looking at what does inspiration look like within his own life, and with all these various pointers that would ultimately head you towards discovering who Jesus is, but not requiring, just as Jesus didn't require prerequisites as a starting point. He simply said, come follow me. That's exactly the same thing we can see within the NCD process, particularly the discipleship tools, just taking people from wherever they're starting from and helping them on that journey. And so again, that everywhere applicability is further and further expanded. And as we've seen, particularly in more recent times, where we've begun working a lot more with the younger generation using NCD principles, we can see that not only do they apply very clearly to younger people, but when we work with younger people, it's not at all uncommon that they ask, why is it that some in the older generation struggle to understand or accept the principles of NCD, because for them it just seems to be so obvious that this is how life works in some sense. These principles point to how life is actually meant to be and how it works when it's working right. So this broad applicability is so strongly established, and many of you will be very familiar with these points in terms of that applicability. But we start to come into today's topic more if we ask the question, NCD applicability, but in every moment. And is it the case that the principles of NCD apply in every single moment, that there is a consequence to each of the NCD principles in every moment of our lives, in every interaction we have with other people? And if that is the case, that they apply in every moment, what are the implications of that? What does that actually mean? And what does it mean practically? What if we were to help churches and coach churches to a greater level of effectiveness? What might this every moment application mean in that particular way? And how might an every moment understanding of NCD principles impact the speed and consistency of improving the health of groups and individuals? We have a fascinating situation whereby quite some years ago, our partner in Canada, Bill Bickle, did some research on churches that were engaged with NCD and churches that had been engaged in NCD but hadn't been perhaps using the survey or engaged for some years. And one of the most remarkable outcomes from that feedback was that even churches who weren't currently using the survey, when those pastors were asked if they would recommend NCD to others, an enormous majority of them said absolutely yes, they would recommend that. So it kind of meant to some degree that even if we're not completely sure what to do about these principles right now, or if we've perhaps hit some barriers with blockage with some of our people or conflict, we can't really refute the principles. The principles themselves seem to have to be dealt with. We need to find a way through them. And so this question of what does perhaps every moment understanding the principles, how might that help us in the usage of the principles, in making progress with health for individuals and for groups and for churches? What can we discover in this every moment applicability if it's actually true? Now, if we want to unpack this, I'd suggest we take some words from our boss, that is not Christian Schwartz, but Jesus, take a few words from our boss and come to understand, well, from many scenarios, I think, but one particular story that I've considered many times in the context of this every moment idea of NCD principles. And that is, you're very familiar with the story Jesus as a man with a withered hand brought before him, and it happens to be, in the place of worship, and it happens to be on the Sabbath. And so there are people testing him, seeing, will he actually heal on the Sabbath? Will he do that work on the day of rest? And of course, as the story rolls out, Jesus is quite upset by this, what the games people are playing in that particular scenario. And of course, he goes on to heal the man. And in the background of this, he's asking questions like, well, if you had an animal that fell into a well, would you not as well pull that animal out, even if it was on the Sabbath? He's saying, of course you would do that. And he poses a question to them. That is, he asks, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? This is an incredibly polarizing question, and it is intriguing for us to consider in terms of the implications of even the day of rest or each moment of our lives, that Jesus he could have simply left his argumentation with, of course you would pull your own animal out of the well if it fell in there on the Sabbath, and surely, this person is even more valuable than your animals. He could have left his argumentation there, but he pushed right through to the fullest extent and really polarizing life to say that it's either about good or it's about evil. It's either about saving life or it's about even killing. Such an extreme statement being made. And yet the response to that was that they remained silent. They realized that there was no arguing with what he was putting forward, as was so many times the case. You could not argue with the logic of what he was presenting about this is how life works. And you can't hide behind pretending to do the right things. You can't hide behind being good people. And in our modern context, perhaps good people, working hard, doing the right thing in church life. You can't even hide behind that. At the end of the day, the measuring stick is, are you doing good or doing evil? Are you bringing life, or are your actions, no matter how small it might be, leading to death, leading to decay, leading to decline in some way, such as the polarizing nature of this alternative that he presents. And he presents such a strong case for what it means to be a human being and the impact that you will have, whether you like it or not, on the lives of other people. And of course, not only did the people remain silent, but it so angered them that they then went and sought out a way to kill him, because he had embarrassed them to such an extent and had exposed their hypocrisy to such a huge degree, and had really revealed to them so strongly that this is the rules of my kingdom. The fabric of all of creation operates on this basis, and so you can't hide behind your apparently good deeds, because this is how life really works. So there's some implications that we can draw from this question of for doing good or doing evil. I'd suggest living in accordance with the way of true life. This is incidentally the way I from my research Christian Schwartz has done as well. The way of true life is a very apt way of translating logos. So, and to say the way of true life became flesh and dwelt among us, which of course mirrors what Jesus said of himself as the way, the truth, and the life. But living in accordance with the way of true life, the principles that govern God's kingdom, is a matter of life and death. It is that polarizing, that you're either leaning towards and pressing towards life, or to some degree pressing towards death. There is no middle ground for any human being. If you're not doing good, you are doing evil. It can sound so extreme to our ears, but if we're going to press into the logical conclusion of what Jesus is saying, it really is that strong. The life and death dynamics of our every action and inaction apply in every moment of life. And we can draw this from this short story, because if even on the day of rest, your actions and inactions are related to matters of life and death in those directions. And even in that moment where perhaps you choose to pull your animal out of the well, well, you know this is a matter of life or death. In this moment, there is a person who it is believed from other biblical writings around the time that this person was possibly even a stonemason, and that their livelihood was dependent upon their hands. And so the importance of Jesus addressing what is happening in this person's life right in that moment is that critical. And another implication is that you risk silence and retribution if you point out the every moment implications of kingdom principles, but your ministry will be very limited if you don't. And this was of course the case for Jesus, that the implications of really following through with making clear the way of true life ultimately had Jesus killed. But it was also the basis on which his being clear about and honest about the way that life actually works meant that people were able to, following his resurrection, people were able to see that this is truly the way to live. And millions and millions and millions of people since that point in time have been able to testify to that in their own lives. And finally, another implication is that living with that every moment life or death approach is precisely why healthy churches and healthy Christians are healthy. The point about healthy Christians is that they're not part-time Christians. They're Christians in every moment, or at least endeavoring to be Christians in every moment. Very healthy churches don't occasionally do some empowering leadership, or occasionally do some passionate spirituality, or occasionally sit down and try to organize the structures of their church a bit better. Very healthy churches have an understanding that those principles are applying in every conversation, in every moment. Even sitting on your own, these principles have an enormous bearing. And that's a very big difference between churches and Christians who are not particularly healthy and ones that are very healthy, is this understanding about the presence of God's kingdom principles in every moment. All right. So what I'd like to do now is to just go through to try to make this even more practical. And I'd like to go through each of the NCD quality characteristics with this doing good or evil understanding in mind. And as I do this, I'd like to encourage you to remember which of the life or death quality characteristic statements that I'm about to mention, which of those statements felt, as we go through them, for whatever reason, most convicting for you personally. And the reason I'd like you to kind of remember that is that after I go through each of these 8, we'll have a little bit of a group discussion time where you can perhaps share a little bit more about why perhaps it was more convicting for you personally in that area. So let's go deep into this, and in a sense, looking at the understanding that very healthy churches have, and ultimately what we need to move churches and Christians towards if they are to make significant progress in their lives and to really see the kingdom come as on earth in their lives, in their families, in their churches, on earth as it is in heaven. All right, first one. Now, in each case, I'm referring to the personal application term we use and the church term we use. So empowering leadership at the personal application level, what that means for me to live it out is the topic of empowerment. So here is the statement: in every moment, as a human with inescapable influence, you are either empowering those around you or oppressing them, even if only to the smallest degree. As a human being, we have influence, and that influence flows out of us. It is the power from God that it can't be stopped being expressed. If you have stopped it, you're dead. So there is power that flows out of you, kind of whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not, and it exerts as the influence that God has given you. And that influence, that power that flows from you, will have an effect. It can't not have an effect on other people. And so that effect is ultimately going to be either an empowering effect that lifts people up, or it's going to be an oppressing effect of some sort that holds people down or presses them down or reduces them in some way. And again, in each of these cases, we could endeavor, if we were sitting with Jesus, to perhaps argue the case. But if we have the life or death, giving life or killing dynamics in mind and how strong that is, I don't know how well we would go in arguing the case for some vague middle ground if we were sitting talking to Jesus on these points. So if this is the case, then what we need to do for ourselves, for churches we work with, in order to move towards what it is like to live an every moment experience of the Christian life, is ask ourselves a question, something like, well, where is my power going? Just in every moment, where is my power going right now? God's given me power. Well, where is it going right now? What's it doing? What effect is it having on the people around me? So if you were working with a church where empowering leadership was a minimum factor, then part of them moving to an every moment understanding of these principles would be for them to just much more regularly start thinking, wherever they are, where is my power going right now? What's it doing in the lives of other people? Many more questions could flow from that, but as an overarching thing, that would help them to start to recognize their influence and how the principles of God's kingdom are playing out right in each moment, wherever they happen to be. All right, the next one, gift activation related to gift-based ministry. And the statement that we can say here is that in every moment, you are either helping to activate your own and others' gifts or shutting them down, even if only to the smallest degree. So in a particular moment, it might be that we get in the way of what someone else's contribution could be, no matter how small and whatever help they may be able to provide in line with their giftedness, but perhaps we do it ourselves. Or in fact, we don't even notice what they could be contributing. We don't even see what it is that they could be offering up. Well, in those instances, we are shutting them down. Or if we ourselves are not focusing to the greatest extent on our greatest giftedness, we are literally minimizing and restraining the work of the Holy Spirit in our life in that particular moment and shutting that down. And there is, again, no middle ground within this. And so for churches or individuals dealing with gift-based ministry or gift activation, an every moment question could be, well, what is my greatest contribution? And in each different moment, what is it right now? Perhaps it is just taking a moment to make sure that I highlight this other person's gift, draw it out from them, encourage them to use it, speak into it in some way. That could be it. Or my greatest contribution is just to really make sure that I am operating in my highest giftedness in this moment, so that everyone can benefit from what God has enabled me to do. We move then to passion and passionate spirituality, and the every moment understanding that very healthy churches live with is that in every moment your passion is either being fueled or snuffed out, even if only to the smallest degree. And in his book, The 3 Colors of Your Spirituality, Christian Schwartz has outlined 9 spiritual styles. And part of the reality of spiritual growth is that there are many different ways of connecting with God and living in the presence of God. And if you only have some of those ways, for example, I'm very strong in the rational style. I feel close to God when I'm confronted with really complicated problems and things that need to be thought through. But if that's the only way that I connect with God, and if I have difficulty connecting with God in silence, or if I happen to be alone, there will be times when I'm losing my fuel, when I'm losing my passion, because I'm unable to connect with God in that particular moment. But very healthy churches can recognize the many different ways and places where God is and where God can be found in everyday life, and are able to tap into that. And so for them to ask themselves, especially if you're working in passionate spirituality, well, how am I fueling my fire? How am I tapping into God in this present moment and seeing what he is able to do in my life? Onto effectiveness and effective structures. The every moment experience of this area can be captured in the statement. In every moment, the time, treasure, and talent available to you is either being used to make the world better or misused, making it worse, even if only to the smallest degree. If you just look around the room or wherever you happen to be today, and if your eye catches anything that, not necessarily that you own, but that you have access to, even if it's people you have access to or things you have access to, the constant question and the reason that we put structures in place in our lives is to make the best possible use of everything that we've been given. And so the challenge for us is that it's either being used well to make the world better or misused, making it worse. So you can't even really put things that you have access to in storage, so to speak, in some neutral sense. Things are either being used well or they're being used poorly. And if they're being used poorly, even to the smallest degree, they are making things worse in the world in some way. There's entropy and decay taking place, whereas things could be getting used in a much better fashion. And again, people who live very healthy Christian lives and lead very healthy Christian churches are exceptionally good at seeing what's available in each different moment and harnessing it and putting it to the best possible use. And if we want to be reminded of the seriousness of this particular category, we need only be reminded of the parable of the talents, and to think that that this was a story told by Jesus a very short time before going to the cross, that there was such a significance to this, sometimes perhaps seen as a more mundane area of organization and a background topic. But this is very serious in the eyes of Jesus, the importance of seeing truly what have you been given and what are you doing with it. So that every moment question in this instance, how well am I using all I have, is part of what those wrestling with effective structures can be helped to ask themselves in the every moment, so that they start to make much better progress and become much more aware of what can be released in this area. All right, let's rolling through and we'll have some discussion very shortly. Inspiration, inspiring worship service. In every moment, you are either inspiring those around you or draining life from them, even if only to the smallest degree. This has a lot to do with the attitude that you're holding in everyday life. As I mentioned earlier, we've recently launched the inspiration process, and so my own household has been deeply connected with this process. Everyone that comes near our house, lives in our house, and anywhere around it has taken this test, and it's a big part of our discussions on a regular basis. And this, particularly for me personally, what it exposes in my life is that for me, I'm a very searching person, wanting to fix things, wanting to find the answers to things, and exploring what needs to be addressed. But unfortunately, in general, that's not matched up quite as well with my level of gratitude, seeing what's already good or what's already getting better. And so for me to be able to see so acutely and more that with my children, my wife, my grandchild, with everyone around me, that when I enter the room, the effect that I can have if I'm not clear on what is good and what is getting better is very, very strong. And I can drain life from a room as opposed to having the breath of God breathe through me into that room, if I'm not clear about that particular growth area. So this has become very, very apparent for me in everyday life. And it means that when I drop the ball and I'm not focused on that, I feel it more acutely. I see the effect much more immediately in the lives of people around me, which is painful to see. But on the positive side, being more aware of that, I can see how I am able to breathe more life into those around me by being aware of in my personal case, the things that are good and are actually getting better. So a key question around that is, what happens when I enter the room? And you relate this right up to inspiring worship services, and imagine, as we're starting to work with now, whole congregations who are asking themselves this kind of question. So if a whole group of people are asking themselves, well, what happens when I enter the room? And they are remembering to prepare themselves when they come to worship. They are recognizing that if you're going to have an inspiring worship service, well, you can't have that unless you have inspired and inspiring worshipers. It doesn't matter how much magic you try to do on the stage, or how well you try to preach, or what songs you pick. If the people who come are not coming from a life of inspiration in the everyday, you're climbing a tough mountain that you're just not going to get to the top of. You're trying to raise the dead in a worship service instead of surfing the wave of God's Spirit flowing into the place where people are taking their life of inspiration seriously. So this question, what happens when I enter the room, is very pertinent in the every moment experience of healthy Christians and churches. Okay, onto the kind of personalized theme of community and around holistic small groups. In every moment, you are either bringing about common unity or destroying it, even if only to the smallest degree. Now, this is so interesting, this one, because when it comes to very healthy churches, there's a difference in the way they think about small groups. Well, many differences, but in one particular way, a big difference in the way they think about small groups compared to churches that are much less healthy. So churches that are much less healthy might think about small groups. We need to organize some groups and let's formalize it, find some leaders and put them in place and put a curriculum together and work it through. Now, that's a good thing. That's helpful. That's going to make progress and going to improve things in the life of that church. But the very nature of people within very healthy churches is that they have simplified their understanding of small groups down to where 2 or 3 are gathered. So it means that if I happen to be with 2 or 3 people, I realize, oh, right now I'm in a small group. I may never be in this same small group ever again, but in this moment I am. What can I do in this time? How can I nurture the heads and hands and hearts of the people in this gathering, in this moment? And so very healthy churches end up, in one sense, with having enormous numbers of small groups, because they can see in the moment that here is a group, and what can we do as part of the church while we are together in this place? And so the every moment reality is that if you're not bringing about common unity with people you happen to be with at the time, in some way, in common understanding, in common action, in common heart, if you're not doing that, then in some way you are destroying it. There is no middle ground to it, even if it's the smallest degree. But we have this opportunity whenever we're gathered with others to nurture that common unity, because that's exactly what very healthy Christians and very healthy churches do. So this is a playful sort of a question, but whenever you happen to be with 1 or 2 other people, how well am I playing with others? Does Adam play well with others? Well, that's the thing. Am I enhancing the lives of those people with me? Am I building that sense of being together, that common unity when I'm there? And in a church with low holistic small groups, if people start asking themselves the question, wherever they happen to be at any time, how well am I playing with others? They're going to make some good progress, and it's going to open their eyes to what can happen in the moment in this particular area. All right, that's the last couple. Wholeness, need-oriented evangelism, or as it can be referred to, even wholeness evangelism. If we take a need-oriented approach to evangelism, we're trying to speak the gospel into the specific points of needs of people. If we do that over time, ultimately, we are getting the fullness of the gospel to speak into their lives so that they would be made whole. That is the ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve there. But it even has to start with us in our own understanding, but then be translated across in our conversations with non-Christians as well, and that is that in every moment you are either filling your world with life or filling it with emptiness, even if only to the smallest degree. So you're either filling up with the fullness and life and all its fullness that Jesus came to bring, or you are eroding your life with empty things within your existence. And it is that polarizing. There's not some neutral ground. You can't park in the middle. You're a living human being. It's going to go one direction or the other. So it's ideal if in each moment you are really looking for what makes your life whole. And so, the question, what am I filling my life with right now? In each different moment, am I filling it with something that is making it more whole or not? And you should ask yourself in the context of this webinar, is sitting there at the moment listening to me and in a moment chatting with each other, is that filling your life and making it more whole, or is it eroding your life? And I mean it very seriously. That's the reality at the moment. It will be doing one thing or the other. If I talk for too long, then certainly it's going to start eroding your life, no question. But that's really part of the question, even right in this moment. And if you imagine a kind of background question, if you look at all these encounters that Jesus had with many different people, the stories portrayed in the Bible and many that we don't even know about, you can easily imagine this kind of very open, beautiful question from Jesus with each person he meets. How fulfilling is your life? And from the rich young ruler to the woman at the well and all these different people, it's like, is there an emptiness in you? Do you feel like something's missing? And as they begin to explore that and find that out, eventually they discover, well, actually what I'm missing is, it's you, Jesus. Like that's ultimately what is most missing. And your way of life is missing in my existence. So it's a beautiful thing to explore and to understand that it's going to be filling with wholeness or filling with emptiness. There is no middle ground. Lastly, love and loving relationships. In every moment, you are either loving those around you or damaging them, even if only to the smallest degree. If in this moment, a person needs correcting love, the fruit of goodness, and instead we just give them joy and just pleasantness at the time, we're damaging them. And equally the other way, if a person needs to experience the love of joy in a particular moment, and in that instant we provide correction to them, correcting love to them, we do some damage in that moment. If a person just needs you to be faithful and to get the job done that you promised that you would do in order to love them, but instead you buy them a bunch of flowers and say, oh, I wanted to give you a surprise, you do damage to them. And equally, if you treat them what they need in that moment is just some kindness and some care, and all you do is kind of sit in the background, just diligently, robotically doing the things that you reliably always do, you do some damage to them in that moment. And such is the incredible nuance that Paul captured in the fruit of the Spirit, and also in the lists in 1 Corinthians 13, just extraordinary typologies. And it's an unbelievably inspired picture of the aspects of love that we need to be able to have on hand. But if we don't love in the way that is most needed by the person being loved in that moment, we do damage to the person. And this happens in the every moment. So the question here is, what form of love do I need to give? And any church working on loving relationships and needing to develop that further, to begin asking themselves that question in the every moment, whenever they're together, whenever they're meeting with one or many people, what form of love do I need to give right now in this moment? They're going to start to make very significant progress towards a more loving environment, because this is exactly what very loving churches do. They're attentive to what would the God of love have me do in this moment in order to reflect love in this exact situation with this exact person. Right. So I'm not sure where it sits for you, and in your discussions in a moment, you'll be able to share some of this, but this every moment understanding of the principles of God's kingdom, these quality characteristics we talk about in NCD, seems to represent demands and opportunities. It's a heavy load if you look at it. If you think about it and try to live and recognize that in every moment you have that potential for impact one way or the other, and you can't even escape it as a living human being, then it can seem to be a heavy load. But if we understand that, as it is in John 1, Jesus came full of truth and grace. If we just pause on that, that's astonishing in itself, given that so many of the fractures and fights and splits through church history were exactly on that dividing line of truth and grace, where some groups emphasize truth more heavily than grace and others grace more heavily than truth. It's one of the most consistent breakage points within the Christian church. But the fact that Jesus was not only had truth and grace in him, but was full of truth and grace is just astonishing. And so for us to become like Jesus in that way, we have to be willing to embrace the fullness of the truth of the way of true life. And on the truth side, we could sort of say that this is the every moment demands of God's kingdom principles. So these things I've been talking about here relating to each quality characteristic, that's very demanding. It's quite grueling. You can understand why the disciples, to some extent, sometimes thought, should we leave? This is too much of a burden. But then, as they said in one instance, when Jesus asked them, "Are you going to leave?" and they said, "Well, where else would we go?" That doesn't mean we're excited by what you're saying. It's a tough message, but you have the words of true life. Like there's no other game in town. You are the only person honestly presenting how life actually is. So there is that burdensome side, but then on the other side, there's also this incredible grace side, and that is that the every moment opportunities provided by God's kingdom principles. So it means that in every single moment, when we're encountering other people, we have opportunity to empower, to activate gifts, to fuel passion, to make better use of whatever's available, to breathe the breath of God into others, to bring about common unity, to increase the wholeness being experienced in our own and others' lives, and to speak exactly the form of love needed in that particular situation, all freely available to us from God, which is an incredible privilege and opportunity that we have. So we can look at it as a demand, we can look at it as an opportunity, and in a sense, it's absolutely both, because it is full of truth and grace. And in reality, these two things completely interact with each other. Grace flows because truth is established, and truth is established as grace flows. And so even if we're struck by the truth that we probably dropped the ball on lots of instances, and we are oppressing in this moment, or we're shutting down someone's gifts, or we're draining life from them rather than inspiring them. Well, if that truth hits us, the beauty is that God's grace flows and we are forgiven for that. And in the awareness of that truth, we're able to grow and to move to a place whereby the truth lived out is empowerment, gift activation, passion, effectiveness, inspiration, etc. in every moment. So it's an incredible picture for us to grasp about how significant these kingdom realities are. And it's important to understand that this is exactly the way that very healthy churches live out their every moment. It's not an optional way, it's the only way. There is no other shortcut or path that can be taken. All right, that's more than enough from me. That's most of what you'll hear from me today. I have a little bit more to share, but just love to open up a solid discussion time now about every moment in your life and ministry. So as you're going through those, hopefully you recall one of those 8 sort of statements, or the general feeling around one of those 8 statements. So the question, first of all, is which of the quality characteristic every moment statements, for whatever reason, felt most convicting for you personally, and why? Was it to do with empowering leadership, to do with inspiration? Was it to do with community? which one struck a chord of some sort for you? And then the secondary question, if you get a chance to get to it, to discuss with each other, how would an every moment mindset towards their minimum factor help the churches you work with?
Thank you, Adam. I really appreciated the perspective, the framing that you gave to each of those, and empowering. How am I affecting positively or negatively to any degree? I kind of followed with that. Yeah, there's several that I think are. You asked for one, so I'll try to. I am feeling lately more convicted that I need to be present in worship with Jesus, coming in, and through that, I think inspiring others around me. I've got stuff that I do to help coordinate things during the worship service and all that, and I've been feeling the need to, okay, there's a point where I need to turn and say, okay, this is my time before the Lord.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yes, absolutely. It's and for some leaders, when I work with them in worship context or with inspiring worship, one of the solutions is I'll arrive at the worship service a little bit earlier so that I can relax and settle down and actually be prepared, and people don't see me running around frantically beforehand and destroying their worship experience. So I'm not draining other people by my presence before the service. Exactly that. Yes, things just like that.
Right.
It's tough not to be convicted in all of them as you're walking through them, Adam. So thank you for posing these ideas in that way. I love the dynamics of the paradox, and I could go off in a tangent about that whole idea of grace and truth and what you've laid out as it applies to the principles. For me, the one most convicting was probably the one at the end, the loving those around you as an individual, recognizing that the need to meet their desire or their need for love in the language that they can accept at that moment for the need they have. Mm-hmm. Instead of me forcing in an effort to do good, forcing my typical way of saying I love you, that may do harm. It's not benign. It's the way you've introduced the notion is that we're either leaning one way or the other. We're not static. We're not neutral. And that was convicting.
Yes, it's a heavy burden until you can feel the upside of it.
I would like to express how grateful I am for the way you brought across this principle, the new angle, the new liveliness that you bring in each of them. We've been writing books applicable to the context we are in India. We've been interacting with the coaches we are trying to train here, because we won't be staying forever in this country and active here. They have to take over and stimulate churches. All right, and I realize how few, thanks to this inspiration, how much better we could do, especially inspiring, especially revealing to me was a point about inspiration, whether we are inspiring those that we relate to, let's say in our role of coaches, for instance, or whether we are training, asking of them to learn, to study, to do better, or are we really bringing out of them the joy and the satisfaction of being effective? And that combined with the relationship, I don't think it can go independently from loving them, as you say, of showing them how much loving the audience, the people they interact with, the pastors they go and visit, the church leaders they try to stimulate, loving them, bringing these principles across in a stimulating and vigorous way is what's going to make the difference. That's what's going to change the churches. So thank you so much.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, because it's interesting how it connects for me personally. I've been doing NCD work for, it's 20 just gone 23 years. And for most of that time, as a person who's very searching but not quite so grateful, my starting point has always tended to be, oh, of course, everyone's going to be so excited to find out what their minimum factor is, their greatest imaginable weakness. And so, I'll pour that on and talk to them that way. And of course, they're quite polite, and they're saying, well, we know we completed the surveys, and yes, this is probably true. And but the thing is, for many of them, they haven't even thought that they had a strength yet. They didn't even know their church, in some cases, even had anything good about it. And the same survey that tells you your minimum factor tells you your maximum factor. And so I've taken to spending more time saying, guys, look, this maximum factor didn't happen by accident. It didn't just fall from the sky. People have shaped this over time and sacrificed and brought this out and aligned themselves with Jesus. And suddenly it's a much more inspiring way to start. We still have to talk about the minimum factor, but at least they're not out of oxygen before I even begin. And it makes a big difference. Yeah.
Another one, and I've not considered myself to be very strong in terms of evangelism. If somebody's open, I'm happy to talk with them, but how to step into the lives of someone who maybe I haven't even asked them yet if they're interested in hearing about Jesus or about anything related or anything that might lead to a spiritual conversation. So I've not really been seeing how I could crack that nut. I appreciated your talking about just from his perspective of looking for what is, I want other people to be whole and seeing need-oriented evangelism from that point. And it's not, it's not just, well, they're hungry, so I could do something like that, but looking at the whole individual and recognizing that oftentimes, or maybe typically, you have to start with what's their pain point before they're feeling comfortable enough to talk about, well, how did I get into this swamp in the first place? So I appreciate your talking about the wholeness aspect, tying that to need-oriented evangelism.
Yeah.
I thought it was very intriguing to be introspective and to understand that the answer is binary. Either you're adding or you're not. That's great if your answer is good. But I think it also forces us to live out a cliche that we love to quote, and that is that worship is a lifestyle.
Yeah.
So how do we live out a lifestyle of inspirational worship? And that means different things to different people in Christianity. But I just think it's cause for pause, very, very intriguing. Yeah, so that's got me thinking. I thank you.
Yeah. And it's intriguing because for many churches dealing with inspiring worship service, and we know this from the data, that they will tend to, in that area and every other area, try to reorganize things, pick better songs and change it to work through these parts. And if you say people are awake for approximately 100 hours in a week and they're in the worship service for maybe an hour and a half, so that's 1.5% of their week that you're trying to leverage to bring about a life of worship. And so it's no wonder that you end up with frustrated preachers and worship leaders who stand up and they see people come in the door and their own heart is sinking before the service has even begun, because you've got 98.5 hours in the week that are not, where people are not being challenged necessarily, that in every moment, every room you're walking into, at work, at home, at the office, wherever you happen to be, and at the worship service, you're having that effect, whether you like it or not. So that's been part of the thing for me in recent times, particularly the Inspiration Project, is to try to get the monkey off the back of so many pastors and worship leaders who are trying their darndest to make those things work. But the raw materials that come in the door, the people who have to be inspired and inspiring, if it's ever going to be an inspired and inspiring worship service, they're not doing much of the heavy lifting at all. So it's it feels like it has one of the largest impacts in that very area, because it's so extreme. This tiny time of worship service and all the rest of the week. So if you're not taking an every moment approach there, you're on a hiding to nowhere, a tough road.
Yeah. I think it's hard. I think the topic of inspirational worship is compounded by the fact that we're living in a more of a spectator culture than we are a participatory culture. And especially with the lockdowns, the cultural norms in your living room. I talked about this to a group of pastors. I said, there's a different set of cultural norms in a living room than there is in any sanctuary. And, but I think it's amplified when people live a life of consumerism and spectatorship. And when we can teach them what it means to live a lifestyle of worship, then that hour and a half is their chance to celebrate that lifestyle. That's a whole paradigm shift. And because it is exhausting when you look out and it's like, are you the chosen frozen today? I'm not sure what's going on. They're kicking it on stage. They're bringing it, or whatever that means to you. But, and I think our culture amplifies that, because if you come outside of Christianity, even at a rock concert or a jazz concert, you're observational. So we're inviting people, especially new Christians, to do something that's kind of foreign to our culture. But if we can teach them that, I just think I think that's neat. And I wish I had heard some of these thoughts before when I worked with a very large church, and I had to break their heart and get the pastor's wife mad. And I didn't mean to get her mad, but inspirational worship was the minimum factor. And that was a very emotional journey to bring them through and to help quantify the seemingly unquantifiable. This would have been, today's teaching would have been really helpful. Thank you for adding this. Okay, I'm going to tap out.
Thanks, Andy.
I guess for me, one of the driving factors really is the whole idea of being able to utilize this stuff to be able to make an impact into people's lives and to release them into what it is that God has for them. And that's always a challenge, but it's exciting to be able to put some parameters around it.
Yeah, thanks, Perry. And thanks for inspiring me by being the other person up at an unspiritual hour of the morning. That's inspiring for me. Thank you.
So the one item that hit home for me was the keyword empowerment. As a person, as a church consultant or church coach, you work with leaders and churches. And the longer you work, the more wisdom and knowledge you collect and gain. And it's easy, say, to overwhelm them with that, what you have learned, or especially as focusing on one single area. And if you do it and do long teaching sessions, especially if you have the gift of teaching as well, then you easily could disempower them, and you lead the congregation or the leaders to a state of oppression. Okay, you can tell everything what you think is right, but this is some kind of disempowerment, and the likelihood that they really will implement that what you suggest will not increase, but decrease the more you tell them. So it's much more better. It's better than say for me, how to find ways, how can I empower the church leaders that are in front of me, not by telling them everything, but somehow by asking well thought of questions and giving them room for group discussions, so that they can on their own come to the very conclusions or even better conclusions that I had in mind. And if they discover those kind of snippets of wisdoms by themselves, I believe there's a higher likelihood that they are interested to implement that what they discovered as a team. Another example, I had a conversation with somebody working at a secular workplace, and the person complained that the very boss that was supervising the person was not satisfied almost in every session with what the person says. Also, the person already has experience over 10 years. So this was not, and the person who was supervising is a perfectionist, and that makes it even harder for her. And she rather would do some mistakes. The person would rather do some mistakes on their own and learn from that, versus being told everything and never being satisfied with the work she is doing. So this is a example of a secular workplace where maybe empowerment is also very important. Can plan the situational leadership quadrant. You remember that there's also different stages: empowerment and coaching. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a important nuance that you raise in that, Bert, because it highlights the fact that when we oppress or drain or damage, it doesn't indicate in any way that it's malicious intent or it at all. And Christian Schwartz and I we did some work around sin quite recently, exploring the three facets of sin or missing the mark, which is in every case, we're talking about sin and missing the mark here. So we could empower, but we've oppressed, we've missed the mark by oppressing instead of empowering. And what emerged, it has not been brought forward all that often, is the manifestations of sin as wrongdoing, that is, that you're most deliberately doing the wrong thing, or ignorance, as you miss the mark because you're just not even aware of something, and the other one being sickness or weakness, that out of weakness you didn't bring about the best thing. And so it highlights that in all of these every moment cases, the conscious attention paid to the people around us and whatever's happening is so critical. And so in one sense, we could say very healthy churches are churches where the people pay attention. It's like, what is happening in this moment? What is God doing in this moment? Because many times we can simply accidentally miss the mark, even without knowing it, but you can still solve that by paying better attention to what is needed to bring life in that moment. Does anyone would like to explore? Now, this is a very interesting thought that comes out of this every moment kind of picture. Now, we talk about applying NCD principles. I've used that term thousands and thousands of times, but it's occurred to me in these explorations I've been presenting and reflecting over the last number of years around these every moment topics and the very nature of NCD principles or God's kingdom principles is that you don't apply those principles. The reality is you either defy the principles of the way of true life and suffer the inevitable consequences, or you align yourself with the way of true life and experience life in all its fullness. If we take this kind of logos understanding, and people reflected on the logos for 1,000 years prior to Jesus coming, and trying to figure out there seems to be a pattern to life. There seems to be a way that life works. And when things don't go that direction, there's death and suffering. And when things go another direction, things seem to flourish. And there was this exploration. And so the genius of John 1 is this understanding that there is a pattern, there is a logos, there is the expression of God in the world, and the pattern, the operating system of the way God's creation functions is of a particular way. And the recognition of John is that, and Jesus is the perfect human representation of the way of true life, the way, the truth, and the life. And so there is a way that life functions. And so we don't choose to apply empowering leadership, but instead we choose to align ourselves with empowering leadership, because that's the way life works. If we choose to deny or defy empowering leadership or any of the other principles, if we choose to defy those, there will be a negative consequence, because that principle doesn't apply because we decide it will apply, or that, oh, we will now choose to make empowering leadership a thing, or passionate spirituality a thing. This is a principle that underlies all of creation. And so in one sense, it speaks into this age-old theological thing of the kingdom that is now but not yet. Like, well, the kingdom is now because the principles of the kingdom all apply right now. They are the way that life functions at its most, at its deepest level. But the not yet part of the kingdom is that for the moment, there's still lots and lots of people in lots and lots of moments who are defying the way that life actually properly functions. And so to kind of shift to this understanding, and even maybe even our language, because as NCD coaches, we need to make sure that we're not conveying the idea that, NCD has some good ideas that you could apply and they would be helpful. But then in the background, it's like, well, or I could choose some other approach or do some other thing. I mean, that's never been the basis of NCD. NCD is always about, what do you have to do, whether you like it or not, if your intention is to have a lasting, sustained, flourishing, growing church, or even personal spiritual life. And so the idea that we are aligning with something has a lot of gravity to it. And gravity is an appropriate way of looking at it, because we don't get to choose whether gravity applies to us. If we choose to try to defy gravity, it will go very badly for us. But if we accept gravity and say that, gravity is going to apply to me, whether I'm here or on the moon, it might be a bit different, but it's still going to apply. And I must respect that. And my life will go better if I respect that gravity is applying to my life. And so there is this deeper level whereby the importance of recognizing these principles, and the fact that you don't sort of do NCD or not do NCD. It's like NCD is done to you, whether you like it or not. It's just whether you're going to align with those principles or not. That's the only question at the end of the day. And so it's very demanding in that sense, but only in as much as the principles of God are very demanding, but also, as I said before, provides that incredible opportunity. Because if you do choose to align yourself with those principles in every moment, it unlocks an unbelievable opportunity to be breathing life into people, to be empowering, to be fueling fires wherever you go, as long as we stop fighting against that and taking a Pharisee attitude and saying, no, we don't want to believe this. In fact, we're going to kill the messenger but we have no way of refuting that. So I just share this as part that, because it is part of the language of the NCD community, applying NCD principles, but at a certain level, it's not actually what happens. It's an alignment with something that is there, whether we like it or not. Now, finally, just to bring this back to very familiar territory for any of us that have done surveys, we're familiar with looking at these funny, abstract-looking bar charts and things that no one, if you said to people, 100 years ago, this is one of the ways we're going to think about the church in the future, they would probably laugh at us all. But any of us who've been involved in NCD for a long period of time can look at one of these charts and you can start to feel it. You can even look at, depending on the minimum factor and maximum factor, you can feel what it would be like to be in that place, and the joys that would be there, and some of the struggles and suffering that may be there as well. And that's all present when we see these things. But I guess what I want to raise with you, and of course, the way that you might communicate this with churches, I leave at your discretion, because the gravity of all of this is quite strong. And so, we've got to work out what can people handle at a given point in time in terms of the weight of what we're talking about in NCD. But one way we can look at it is that Jesus taught us to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And very much we can say that that's what we are trying to help to release and see become manifest in local churches when we help them to improve in their health. That, kind of in our own funny language, attributes that seem to be attributes of heaven: effectiveness, empowerment, love, inspiration, gift activation, passion, wholeness, community, the way that God wants his children to be experiencing life. That's what we are moving towards. Now, that's obviously familiar, but looking at it just this way does have that danger that it's like, well, they would be nice things, but if we don't pursue those things now or for a period of time, that might be unfortunate, but it's can feel almost somewhat optional in a sense. But it's simply not the case at all, because if it's not on earth as it is in heaven, then in some sense it is on earth as it is in hell. There's not really any other conclusion. And so again, I leave it to your discretion about how to approach these things. But if there is not effectiveness and effective structures, there is destruction of some form. If there's not empowerment, there is oppression. If there's not love, there's damage happening. If there's not inspiration, there's suffocation and draining happening. If there's not gift activation, there's stunting of people's lives and abilities taking place. If there's not passion, there's apathy being actively developed. If there's not wholeness, there's erosion and hollowing out of people's souls. And if there's not community, there's disintegration and fragmentation and people and families and lives being torn apart. That's the reality of it. And so when we see a low result, and in this is a sample from a real church I'm working with presently, and holistic small groups or community is their lowest area. And so there is actively in daily church life and the lives of the people, there is disintegration that happens in relationships where common unity could be getting built. Now, as I say, I don't start with that now as the point, but for people to understand this is the gravity of what we're talking about here. We need to understand that every moment is critical, because the reality is that we look at a church profile, it's like a photo taken at one point in time in church life, but that picture we see when we do a survey is made up of millions and hundreds of millions of moments lived out across all the people in the life of that congregation, whereby in a given moment they're making a decision and action more towards life, and another one more towards death, and then life and towards death. And the sum of all of those moments is what ends up coming out on the page. And so this is what we are dealing with. But the only way to be moving forwards ultimately is that in every moment, there are more decisions being made, more actions being taken that point towards on earth as it is in heaven, and away from on earth as it is in hell. And so moving towards this every moment understanding is very, very practical, because there are consequences no matter what. And these principles are not applying because we choose to apply them. These principles exist already and must be respected, or we will suffer the same consequences as if we ignore the existence of gravity. All right, that's all I have for you today from my perspective. But yeah, just as we finish up, very happy to just open up to any other thoughts or questions or comments. Might be on the today's topic, or it could be anything else related to NCD that you might like to explore while we're together. But please feel free to speak up.
Thank you for putting these thoughts and ideas into language that we can understand and grasp, Adam. Been thinking about the idea of paradox. I mentioned it earlier as we were talking, and we are either leaning toward something or leaning toward the other thing. The dynamics of grace and truth, knowing this, now that we're aware of it, we have language to understand the every moment implications of these things. The truth of it can be a burden. What I'm encouraged by is the dynamics of it is that when we are aware of the truth, Jesus also is capable of infusing us with the grace to leave that moment and move a different direction and change the dynamics in our own behaviors. Jesus wasn't binary. He wasn't either right or wrong, although he was. It's not just truth or grace. He was capable of using both of those muscles, the right hand or the left hand, and he knew exactly how much of each one to use at any moment. That's where he had it over us. We have to learn that ability. That's the transformation I think Jesus has to bring to us. Yes. Is having enough of both of those things to access and knowing how much of either one to use in the moment.
Yes.
But grace has to win out for me.
Yes.
Because I'm going to get it wrong. And the hope is that Jesus transforms my ability to change the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good word. Very good word.
I think the way you presented it, Adam, is really helpful also when we look for new contacts and we do NCD orientation, introduction, whatever. It's a very pointed way. I mean, life or death, right? So I think it will help us also to work with our coaches, because they are the ones who go to the pastors' meeting or who have the local contacts to really put it clearly like that. And I'm looking forward to see if it will challenge more people than before. Like usually like just recently, one of our coaches, he was invited for a pastor's meeting, I think 13 or so was there. And he says, yeah, it was good response. And I think maybe one or two will decide for the survey. How much is that? So if you present it the way you did tonight, there should be a few more, I think.
Yeah, hopefully. And it's funny when you have the conversations with people like that, because sometimes they'll feel like, oh, these NCD people, they're a bit dogmatic, they're a bit strong in what they're saying. You're saying, well, take it up with Jesus. Like, feel free to argue the point with Jesus if you like, because in effect, rarely will any NCD person ever say this is a matter of life or death. But that's precisely what Jesus said. It's really that strong, and it's helpful to have what Jesus has already said. And so we're just trying to put it into slightly different words that you can then action and use in a survey. But the weight of it is beyond us.
We used to say healthy or unhealthy, but that sounds flat when you say alive or dead. And Jesus wants nobody lukewarm, no.
Exactly. Yes, that's right.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, wonderful. If there's no other questions or comments, I'd like to just pray for us all now and be on our way, and I might go and have some more sleep. Lovely. Let's pray. Jesus, I, in this moment, am just so grateful that you are not some foggy, purely sort of mystical kind of teacher that said vague things and left things completely unknown. There were plenty of times where you teased us and with truths that we would have to try to explore, but there's plenty of times where you made it very, very clear to us what is at stake in the decisions we make and whether we choose to live in line with your way of through life. And I just thank you that we can have that confidence and that we don't need to live in a foggy way and we don't need to present foggy messages. But in the same way, we don't have to present messages that are condemning either. It's just saying there is life in the kingdom is demanding in one sense, but it's also the most beautiful thing imaginable and provides the most incredible opportunities imaginable in every moment. And I just thank you that that is your way. It's just who you are, and that we can be a part of that. We can experience it directly, personally ourselves. And in the same way, we can bring that vision of life in all its fullness to other people around us as we coach and guide them. So I just pray that you will give us all a strong sense of courage to present your full gospel, to present your full message, the fullness of the truth and grace that you brought. And that we would see increased fruit from that as people understand that we're serious when we when we say these things. And at the same time, there is incredible possibilities that open up when we're willing to genuinely start walking and following you. As simple as that, walking in your ways. We just appreciate that so much, and thank you that you are the model for us of empowerment, gift activation, passion, effectiveness, inspiration, community, wholeness and love. And that above all those things, you call us your friends, which is amazing. So we love you, Jesus, and we pray all this in your name and for your kingdom's sake. Until we meet again, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Adam.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much, Adam, that you securely brought us as a tour guide through the Australian outback back to the Gold Coast. We want to say thank you for your NCD webinar presentation today. I believe everybody it was blessed by the topic, and I will contemplate about it and see in which ways I can utilize and tap into that interesting topic. I want to pinpoint to the next NCD webinar. It will be on December 7th this year, 6 p.m. in Berlin, and this time presenter Christian Schwarz. I also want to say that those who want to speak with Adam after the webinar, please stick around a little bit longer so that you have opportunity to ask any questions or make any comments that will not be recorded. So thank you very much for your participation, not just the Australian guy, but also everybody around the globe. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.